Welcome back everybody to another video here. On this video we are gonna talk about the Xbox Series S and its capabilities of doing 120 Hertz. And now we know that Hertz is refresh rate and frames per second is your frame rate. So you got your frame rate on one hand, and then you got the refresh rate on the monitor side that is trying to track your GPU or CPU on your frames per second. So it's pretty much two different things, but it has been brought to my attention, and by the way, thank you Lucas, it's been brought to my attention that on the Series S, just because your refresh rate is outputting at that number is not necessarily mean that the game that you are playing is supported by that frames per second. So that's what we're gonna elaborate more on in this video and discuss. And now that being said, then the Xbox Series S, what's the point of buying it if a lot of games or some games is not doing what the Xbox Series X is doing, which is outputting that 120 frames per second support. So I'm just gonna read some key points here real quick here, and then so that we can clarify on this 120 Hertz ordeal here on the Xbox Series S. So you also need to understand the difference between 120 frames per second and 120 Hertz. It's easy to get confused between the two, but simply put, Hertz refers to the number of times your display refreshes per second, while frames per second refers to the number of image frames generated by the console. Unlike gaming monitors that are available for anything from 144 Hz to 360 Hz, TVs are mostly limited to 60 Hz. To experience the full potential of 120 frames per second on the Xbox Series X or Series S, you need to make sure your TV or monitor offers at least a 120 Hz refresh rate. Depending on the display resolution, you also need to make sure your TV or monitor has an HDMI 2.0 or newer HDMI 2.1 port, which is necessary for 4K 120 Hz gameplay. Okay, so that pretty much sums up your refresh rate and your frame rate. Even though they coincide, they work off one another, they're totally different. And on top of their two different things, on top of that, even though your whatever console you're playing, even though your refresh rate is saying that is the hertz you're running at, the refresh rate that you're running at, it is not necessarily true that your frame rate is running that frame rate. So that's to clarify that aspect. And obviously these are the games that support the 120 frames per second on the Series X. And now the frames per second boost feature, I'm not 100% sure what that really means, but I'm assuming that is be close as it can to the 120 Hertz, 120 frames per second. And for the important games that I play, well, so when they talk about this Call of Duty Warzone, I'm assuming this is also Call of Duty Modern Warfare, and for the Series S, it supports it for 120 Hertz frame per second, but at 1080p resolution. And for the Cold War, evidently it's only supported for 100 frames per second on the Series X at 1200p resolution, and not at all on the Series S. So, and this is a pretty updated information here. And I know for sure Gears is supported at 120 Hz for the Series S. So basically, for Call of Duty Modern Warfare or Modern Warfare and Warzone, for the Series S, it does support 120 frames per second on the Xbox Series S, and also for Gears 5, it is supported 120 frames per second. But for the Call of Duty Cold War, it is not optimized or supported 120 frames per second. And even then, when I tested the Modern Warfare and Gears at its true 120 hertz, 100 frames per second, it is between that and the Cold War. I didn't, obviously can't tell the difference if it's really running at 120 or not, or it dips down. But it plays identical for me for the Cold War. But nevertheless, obviously, according to these articles and information, not all games on the Series S supports it. But the good news is Modern Warfare and Gears 5 does support the 120 frames per second. So to sum it up here, guys, refresh rate is your hertz on your monitor, and the frames per second is what your GPU CPU is outputting, and it does not necessarily mean that your refresh rate on your monitor, which is your hertz, is actually outputting that frames per second. So just wanted to clarify on that note. And let's see here, let me check one more thing here. So these are the list of games that supports 120 frames per second on Xbox Series. So Series X and Series S, and optimized frame per second boost, whatever that really means. So basically, we're gonna look for the Series S on this column here. So Battlefield 1, no. 5, no. Borderlands, no. Cold War, no. But optimized, but no. Warzone, which is Modern Warfare, included, I'm assuming. Yes. And the other game, Gears 5, yes, at 1080p for the Series S. So basically, it does support a lot of games, but I don't know why it does not support Black Ops Cold War. I don't know why it's not. I know this is back in 2020, but I'm sure even now in 2021 it's not supposedly not supporting 120 frames per second. But either way, it's the smoothest you can get off a console. So, and just wanted to go down this list here because obviously, who would know? I didn't even question if certain games are supported or not. But obviously, it is a good question. So, yep. So Series S is basically not everything can do it. A lot of things can do it, but just not everything like the Series X does. So that is pretty much it for this video. Just wanted to clarify on refresh rate and frame rate, and on the Series S and what its actual power and performance and or what it actually can do. And so just to clarify that, now we pretty much know the limitations of the Xbox Series S. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Hooded Dragons out.